So, good morning. So good to be with you in this virtual way. I have told bits and pieces of this story before, so bear with me. I really do have a point. So, I grew up going to church, going to the Episcopal Church, and was real steady in my church going up until my sophomore year in college. And during that period of time, I'd left the Episcopal Church, but I was going to others. And anyway, it was important to me. But for various reasons, which I'm not going to get into now, I ended up leaving when I was a sophomore. And I don't think I necessarily left church with any intention of coming back or not. I don't even think I thought about it. But regardless, it wasn't until my early 30s that with very rare exceptions, usually maybe to go to a service with my parents, or back then mostly weddings, I did not darken the door of a church until my early 30s. And at that point, I was working as an attorney. I was a deputy city attorney here in San Diego. It was a great job, and yet it didn't feel satisfying. It just didn't feel right. And I'd gotten my heart broken a few times, and I just thought, whatever it is I'm doing isn't working, so maybe I should give this church thing a try again. So I was talking to a lawyer in my office, and I was living downtown, and he sort of was into church, and he said, well, there's St. Paul's Episcopal Cathedral, probably the closest church to where you're living. And I said, okay, great. So I went, and obviously it took. I'm still doing it, and I don't have any plans to change. And upon coming to church, I got mega involved right away. Everything was a balm to my soul, just what I needed, including joining the Stewardship Committee. And it wasn't that I wanted to join the Stewardship Committee, but I was just sort of in that stage where if somebody said, Allisyn, do you want to do this? And I'd say, sure. So I did. In this same vein, then, one Sunday I was an usher, and the chair of the Stewardship Committee came up to me, and he said, Allisyn, would you be willing to give the Stewardship Homily this year? Now, I had no idea what a Stewardship Homily was. Not a clue. But I figured someone would fill me in, so I said, sure. And the first thought that came to my mind, I did figure it probably meant getting up and saying a few things about stewardship. And I was a lawyer, so I was used to talking. The first thing that came to my mind was, wow, what should I wear? And the next thing that came to my mind was, that's probably not the right question. Now, in the many, many years since then, and this was obviously long before I was ordained, I think about that conversation, because really it ended up leading me in part to the path that I traveled in order to be ordained. But whenever I tell the story, I'd say, well, that really showed that my values were askew. And I'm not going to argue with that, because my values were askew. But I have come to believe that actually it was exactly the right question. It wasn't asked with the right intent, but it was the right question. So in the snippet that we hear from the gospel, from Matthew's gospel, in which Jesus is once again talking to some of the Jewish religious authorities, they are always trying to trip him up. You'd think after a while, because it never seemed to work out very well for them, they'd stop. But they didn't. So once again, they're into this conversation with Jesus, I think more or less to indict him, to incite a riot, that Jesus says, don't pay taxes. You can see the headlines now. But that wily Jesus, he just doesn't go there. So in the famous story, he says, show me the coin. Whose picture's on the coin? Well, it's the emperor's picture. And then Jesus says, well, then render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's. Now, it's Jesus. And we see from the Jesus that emerges from all four of the Gospels is that he very seldom just says something that means exactly what it says, or exactly what he said. There's a deeper meaning. And so you can bet that Jesus is not talking about, does one pay taxes, say, versus a tithe. It's not an either or. It's not even a traditional and. Because I think, once again, we have to take the important part of that line, render unto God what is God's. Because it is our proclamation that everything we have, our very lives, is from God. And whatever we give is also from God. But sometimes our intent may be different. So we may render our taxes, we may render our pledge, we may render our credit card bills, or go out to dinner, or any number of things. None of these things, of course, are bad in and of themselves. But it's a question we so seldom ask is, what does it mean to render unto God? It's so much more. Now, obviously, we are in our stewardship season, and this is a stewardship season like no other, at least in my life. There is tremendous upheaval. The word that keeps coming to mind is one of my favorite words. Everything is just cattywampus. It's a little crazy. And so during this period of time, of course, we, along with other churches, are asking that people pray about their pledge and to think about what's really good for them to do right now. And as we have said so many times, whatever it is, I mean, be at peace. Really, some people can give more, some people can give less, some people can't give anything. Be at peace. But throughout it all, it is, what does it mean to render unto God? And this is where the question is, what shall I wear, is so important. Now, there's lots of terminology for it. It can be the armor of God, the cloak of Christ. I tend to think, for me, it's a garment, or sometimes even a big, deep shawl of Jesus. And that when we're called to think about what does it mean to render unto God, we are to put on this garment. Actually, we're really supposed to keep this garment on all the time. But certainly, when we contemplate what it means to render unto God, we need this garment. We need it. Because when we wear it, when we don it, it's not just something that we put on. It's something that becomes part of us. It reaches into our very heart and soul. And it allows us to see things in ways that we never, ever would otherwise. It allows us to see with the eyes of God. And what it means to be beloved community. And what it means to be God's heart and hands in the world, however we do it. And so, yes, render unto God. But through it all, and I know I don't always do this, but when I think about this particular stewardship season and beyond, I think our call is to always remember and to always ask ourselves the question,